photo session, topic discussion, certificate awarding, and closing. To start this seminar, with an excitement, ambitions, let us listen solemnly to the national anthem of Indonesia, followed by hymn of Universitas Terbuka. Thank you. After we boost our spirit up, we would like to invite you to pray with our belief for the successful of this seminar. Prayer begin. Thank you for the prayer. This is now time to hear the opening speech from Head of Public Financial Accounting Study Program to Mr. Ratna Marta Dewi SAM.
Tes. Sinyal, sinyal, sinyal. Oke. Ya, thank you, Bu Yusita. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oke, thank you. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to the International ELecturing Public Financial Accounting Study Program Universitas Terbuka. I extend a warm welcome and heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker, Professor Pawan Adhikari from Essex Business School, University of Essex, UK. Hello, Prof. It's nice to see you again.
Hello, thanks, Ratna. Good to see you again.
Yeah. And we also have a special participant, Prof. Indra Bastian. Selamat sore, Prof. Halo, Prof. Nah, okay. Yeah. Um, okay, and special thanks to dedicated committee for their tireless efforts in making this event possible, and all the participants who have loyally joined us again today. Today is the second day of our international lecturing series with Prof. Pawan Adhikari. Today, Prof. Pawan will present even more intriguing material than yesterday. Public sector accountability for climate change and the circular economy. For your information, this international lecturing activity is a regular event held every semester. It's aimed to provide a deeper understanding of various subjects in public financial accounting. We hope this program enhances our understanding of public sector accounting, society. This aligns with the tagline of the Public Financial Accounting Study Program Universitas Terbuka, accelerating better public services. Lastly, I encourage you to actively participate and ask questions if you need clarification. Our speakers will be happy to provide further information. Thank you and enjoy the program. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Halo, Bu Yusita.
Yeah, thank you.
I offer to you.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry, is my internet is not too stable today, like yesterday, Miss. Okay, thank you for the motivating speech, Mr. Ratna. Before we start today's section, participants are expected to activate the camera for photo session. Please active the camera, everyone. Make a good smile with smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I'm sorry, my. Okay. Thank you very much. Now it's time to hear our amazing speaker, Professor Pawan Adhikari. Yesterday we had a discussion about public sector accounting and development insight for emerging economics. For today's discussion, we will hear the insight about public sector accountability for climate change and circular economy. In this session, we have a special speaker, of course, Professor Pawan Adhikari. Before we start this seminar session, let me read his curriculum vitae like yesterday. Okay, we know that Professor Pawan Adhikari is a professor of accounting at Essex Business School and the director of the Essex Accounting Center, University of Essex. He is an associate editor of the Journal of Public Budgeting, Accounting and Financial Management. He served in the executive board of Comparative International Governance Accounting Research Network, or CIGAR. He is a co-chair of the CIGAR PhD Colloquium. Professor Adhikari's research is primarily within the domain of public sector accounting. His research is widely used in policymaking in South Africa. Professor Adhikari was part of the team was awarded in 2023 the Best International Research Impact by the University of Essex. He is a recipient of several awards or grants: the European Commission Erasmus Plus, the World Bank FIFA Research Award on 3 occasions, the African Accounting and Financial Association AAFA Award, the ELRCEEA Impact Fund, the Priority Challenge Project Fund, GCRF, and SANSS or Supervisor LED. All of which have enabled his to team up in facilitating research in areas such as citizen engagement, circular economic, climate budgeting, and accountability, financial resilience, and public financial management and transparency in the UK and countries in Asia and Africa. Beyond accounting, Professor Adhikari has collaborated with researchers working in the department, such as sociology and climatology, and develop research on migrant entrepreneurship, child trafficking, and the post-COVID entrepreneurship in emerging economic. In 2019, Professor Adhikari was awarded the Best Postgraduate Supervisor at the faculty level at the University of Essex. Now, please welcome Professor Pawan Adhikari. Hello, Professor Pawan Adhikari, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ishida. Thank you very much for the very generous introduction. Perhaps I'll share my slides at the beginning. Yeah. Thank you all for attending the lecture today. So today is a very interesting topic, and it's about this public sector accountability, climate change, and circular economy. And this paper or the lecture I developed based on my work because in the last few years I had the opportunity to work in this area. So based on my understanding, and I tried to capture the recent debate on this area. And then I also see the challenges, because when you talk about climate change, yeah, and we talk about basically this macro level issues. We talk about COP, or we talk about NDC, we talk about this greenhouse gas emission. But as you see that mentioned, because I'm also involved in interdisciplinary research, it means I try to see climate change, how the climate. Of course, I look at the climate change accounting or reporting at the macro level, but at the same time, I'm also interested to see how the climate change is affecting life and livelihood at the local level, and I try to connect that with the accountability. So whether government or whether citizens or whether local agencies are able to discharge their climate accountability or not. So I think that is the theme of today's lecture. So I'll start with the scale of climate problem. Then I will, of course, basically I'll start probably with accountability, because we have this kind of traditional understanding of accountability. We also know how accountability work in the public sector, but now there are a lot of debate, or there are discussion whether the type of accountability that we promote in the public sector, whether that is adequate or sufficient to address the grand challenges we are facing, like for instance climate change, or to facilitate the circular economy business model. Then at the end, then I'll go to my next discussion, where I try to show how the climate change. Okay, we talk climate change at the higher level, but when we go to local level, when we go to the life of people, how climate change is affecting their livelihood, their life, and I try to understand. Okay, then my argument is to discuss that. Okay, the type of accountability that we promote in the public sector may not be sufficient to address the challenges posed by climate change, and we may need to think accountability from different aspects. Then I will reflect some of the academic work on this area, and I have the conclusion. So it's basically, let's say, when you think about accountability, we basically think of how it's a two-way relationship, yeah, because there is accounting and there accounter. So there's a kind of two-way relationship between accounter and accounting. Of course, there is a flow of resources and there's a flow, and how this relationship work. So it's kind of very traditional way of understanding accountability. So basically, we understand, okay, it's a two-way relationship between accounting. We also call principal, or for instance, let's say for financial accountants, we call it shareholders. And accounter, it could be agent, it could be director in the company who provide information to shareholder. So it's a two. The first thing is, the first understanding is a two-way relationship between principal and agent, and at the same time. But if you look at the wider context, so we can see, okay, we are embedded in multiple accountability relationship. Let's say, for instance, I'm a teacher, so I'm accountable to students. I work at the University of Essex, so means I am accountable to my director or the university vice chancellor. Yeah, let's say I'm in a family, so I'm accountable to my children. So you see, we are kind of embedded in this multiple form of accountability relationship, and therefore it's very, like many accounting scholars, they argue it's a very difficult term. When we talk about accountability, it's ambiguous, it's a very complex, it has multiple dimensions, and it's kind of difficult to understand because sometimes we can see some types of accountability are legally binded, because let's say when I drive the car, I need to follow the traffic regulations. Yeah, those things are codified in regulation, but some things are not codified, and that is very much depend on my morality or ethical values. So means there are two different forms of of course there are different types of accountability, but what I'm saying is some of them are kind of legally binded, so we are obliged to discharge accountability. Let's say, as an employer, I have to perform well, and that is kind of obligation. But when you talk about climate change, so there are no such kind of obligation, mandatory thing. So it's very much based on our morality or ethical values, and that probably is the point where we can distinguish climate accountability from other normal type of accountability we talk. So like I mentioned, in the accounting literature, there are different types of accountability have been mentioned. For instance, there's a market accountability, there's a legal accountability, supervisory accountability, fiscal accountability, hierarchical accountability, peer. So there are different types of accountability exist. And the main concern is to what extent because the fact is that all these accountability mechanisms are guided or based on so-called traditional accounting system, okay, double entry accounting system, or the type of accounting we use today can be referred to as traditional accounting system, and all the accountability mechanisms that been talked by many accounting scholars are developed on this accounting system. But now they are increasing, but if you go to recent studies, and they are raising concern that, okay, about this environmental and social accountability. Of course, there's a lot of papers now, they talk about environmental and social accountability of multinational companies working in developing countries, and these papers have raised concern about to what extent the social and environmental accountability have been able to fulfill the requirement, because the argument is that those accountability are built on traditional accounting system, and the focus of traditional accounting system is to promote the profit or welfare of shareholder, because there is less focus on other stakeholders. For instance, let's say there's a less focus on society, there's a less focus on morality, so those things are not embedded in our accounting system. So when we try to discharge social and environmental accountability by using the accounting system that we are using today, do you think that that accountability will kind of sufficient or not? So that is the current debate now. So there are calls in the accounting literature, and they call, okay, we need to think about accountability based accounting, because today we are talking about accounting based accountability, because accountability is developed on the accounting system that we use. But there are some scholars, they argue that, okay, that is not the way, or maybe that will be, or it will be more effective, it will be more efficient when we talk about climate change or circular economy. Then in those issues we need to think about accountability based accounting. So first we need to think about accountability, and then we need to develop accounting system in a way that is capable of discharging, let's say, climate accountability. Not that we think about accounting and discharging climate accountability. It should be all the way around. So these are the debates we'll find in the accounting literature. And if you want to know about those debates, you can read the paper by Dillard and Brown and Dillard and Vinari, and they talk about different form of account, like critical dialogical accounting. They talk about ethical accountability, and those different aspects of accountability are there in their work. So, for instance, there's the one, let's say, when you talk about Dillard and Vinari, they talk about this, how the critical dialogical accounting. So, what is that then? So, how it is different than the type of accountability we are practicing today? And they argue that difference is that it will, how is it, you can see it, because it is more pluralistic. It will be kind of focused on democratically governed society. So the idea is that when we talk about accountability, we need to think about plurality. We need to think, okay, there are multiple stakeholders, and their demands are different. So we need to develop kind of accounting technologies that can meet the requirement. So it should be more, how is it, bottom-up approach. For instance, it could be more engaging, like citizen engagement. So there are different ways how we can promote dialogue, and in doing so, how can we discharge accountability more effectively and more efficiently. Then moving back to public sector, is I think in the public sector it may be even more traditional, because in the public sector it's very much we talk about like the democratic control, and then of course, because this accountability is meant to kind of restore this democratic mechanism. So there's an actor, there's a forum, there's a government, there's a parliament, there's a people, and then and this is kind of very traditional way of discharging accountability. And then, of course, like in many countries, they think this budgeting is very important, because budgeting is approved by the parliament. Parliament is elected by people. So in a sense, and the government is allowed to spend money based on the allocation in budget. So in a way, because they try to interpret accountability with the democracy, with the functioning of democracy. And then many argue that this is a very traditional way of thinking. So, because now we are living in different or changed times, changed era. So that traditional way of accountability may not work in all cases. But we can say now the evolved, there's many different types of accountability are evolving not evolving, but many different types of accountability models are being discussed in the public sector as well. Because, for instance, if you look at the more recent studies, they talk about like a democratic they try to move from democratic accountability to managerialism, and from there they have also talking. There are different researchers. They are talking about different type of accountability, like learning accountability, because that is the way how we can encourage a public sector administrator to improve their capacity and to improve and to deliver public service more effectively. They also talk about social accountability, because public sector should be focused more on how is it delivering grassroots level development, grassroots level emancipation and empowerment. So many researchers they are focusing or emphasizing social accountability. And more recently, if you read the paper by, for instance, Groshi or Stekolny or other scholar, they talk about this digitalization, and they talk about digital accountability, because the argument is that because of the digitalization, public service delivery had been improved. At the same time, there are adverse consequences of digitalization, because some people or some marginalized people have been excluded. So they talk about different type of accountability, and but what is important is that all the researchers, they agree that the need of accountability has been felt even more now, because we see the rise of corruption in societies. We are like many societies, they are facing the problem of this how is it, migration, or there's abuse of power, because we see there's a decline in public confidence and trust in government. So although in the public sector there are different forms of accountability have been discussed, the main idea is that all the scholars argue that we need to think about accountability more seriously in the public sector. It's not only to address the problem we are facing, but there are many different types of problems the society facing now. For instance, corruption could be one problem. So I think there is a big discussion going on about accountability. And of course, one important part of discussion is this climate change accountability. So of course, they also scholar also argue that, okay, because if you look at Paris Agreement 2015, and then we'll find it clearly mentioned that that countries should consider their public expenditure policies and budgetary decision making. So there is a specific point in this Paris Agreement where it emphasized the importance of public expenditure policies and budgetary decision in mitigating climate crisis. So you see the connection between climate change and climate budgeting accounting is already mentioned, although not explicitly but implicitly. And this based this, of course, all countries they follow, and maybe not all, but almost all countries follow this Paris Agreement, and countries are required to prepare how they are going to mitigate the climate problem, developing this nationally determined contribution. So probably you can check the website. You can find Indonesia may have also developed this NDC, and it is revised very often, where and this is the kind of document or strategy telling how the governments are addressing the climate problems, what kind of strategies they are devising, and what kind of results or outcomes they are expected in the next decade. So the most important, but still, okay, you see this how there is now is the connection between climate change and budgeting accounting is mentioned in the agreement. But if you go to the International Public Sector Accounting Standard Board, and the board had, and in the website of the board, we can clearly see that despite significant government influence over the global economy, there are currently no internationally recognized public sector specific sustainability reporting standards to guide how they measure and report their critical contribution to addressing the global climate emergency. So of course, for the private sector, there's a lot of guidance, but in the public sector, there's still no clear guidance about this house, no clear guidance, no standard for reporting sustainability and climate change issues. So that is the key issue in public sector. But then, of course, then the problem now is, okay, there is because the connection between climate change and accounting and budgeting has been acknowledged. Second point is there is no regulation, kind of globally accepted regulation or standard for sustainability or climate change. Second thing. And the third thing is, okay, as a result, because we see a lot of consequences, because we see there's a lack of climate accountability, because there is no climate accountability or no climate accounting, no sustainability accounting, or at least we can say globally accepted accounting or standard or globally accepted standard for sustainability accounting. So the problem now is there is a lack of climate accountability, because there's no supporting accounting or no supporting budgeting system. And we see, so what are the consequences of this lack of climate accountability? And one consequence is we see in the last 25 years, this is the data from the World Bank, and the World Bank argued that in the last 25 years, the last 25 years have been good for the world, because we see the decline in poverty, because we see there's a lot of social changes like digitalization, and we saw improvement in the life of people. But now, because of the climate change, we see that trend is reversing. Now the argument is that the way the global poverty is declining can be reversed because of this problem. For instance, because of a problem of climate change. So what is the problem then? The problem is the rising global temperature and sea levels due to the excessive use of this energy or resources by high income and rapidly growing middle income countries. And what is the impact? Climate change may drive 68 million people to 135 million. So between 68 million to 135 million people may fall into poverty by 2030, and mainly in Africa and Asia. Because so how the people are falling to poverty? Because food prices are increasing, their health condition is deteriorating, they are exposed to extreme weather and disaster, they are experiencing the social problem like migration, displacement, loss of cultural identity, etc. So there is argument, okay, because so what is important now? Like many accounting scholar, or scholar in different disciplines, they argue that the main problem is because we think climate change as part of environmental crisis, but that is not correct. Because let's say if you go to the global forum and let's say discussion about COP or like Paris Agreement, and still the idea is that this is a very much an environmental problem or crisis, but the argument is that it is beyond environmental crisis. And when you talk about climate accounting or climate accountability, I think that the lack of climate accountability can trigger a social crisis. So climate change is more than environmental crisis. Climate change is a social crisis. But the argument of how, why, or how it can be defined as a social crisis. The argument is that a climate vulnerable escalates due to, and they argue that there's a climate this climate vulnerability escalates due to a combination of different factors, because there are geographical locations, socioeconomic status, culture, gender, access to resources, assurance of social justice, decision-making power. So all these factors are involved, and how is it? This factor will influence how this climate. These factors are kind of implicated in climate vulnerability. And then there's an argument that certain groups of people are more affected by climate change. For instance, like female headed households, children with disability, indigenous people, ethnic minority, landless tenants, migrants, workers. So they identify these are the people who could be more affected by the effect of climate change. And they argue that, okay, these people who are already affected, the idea is that those people who are already affected by climate change, they are kind of more, they are, how is it, this marginalized or affected disproportionately. Because, for instance, they say when the because we talk about carbon pricing, and the idea is that carbon pricing has resulted in higher public transportation fare. Because the idea is we need to reduce carbon, and that will create that will lead to rise in transportation fare. And then, for instance, we talk about how the limiting forestry activities, and when we limit those kind of activities, the livelihood of indigenous community would be affected. So the whole idea that those people who are already poor, they are more affected by the policy that enacted at the higher level about climate change. So we talk about COP, or we talk about the World Bank, or we talk about different forum, and they talk about different climate mitigating policies. But the whole idea is that those policies are not bad, but those policies are affecting those poor people in the society, how to say, more than any other people, because those people, because the fact that we need to understand that climate, how the vulnerability it's based on different factors. There's a geographical factor, there's a gender factor, there's a access to, so there are so many factors are involved. So we need to consider these different factors, how these different factors are affecting the lives and livelihood of people, and then we think about climate accountability. So that is the key idea. So when you talk about climate change as a social crisis, and these are some of the examples, because we see that because of climate change, we see the rise in migration, because 216 million people were migrated, and you see the figure here, many people in Asia, Africa, they have to, how to say, migrate from the society. It's not like migrating from one country to other country. We are talking about migrating from one society to different society within the country, because there's a flood. So the flood means people have left nothing, so have to move to the bigger cities for employment. So we are talking about those kind of things now. So a lot of people have to migrate to different cities or society because of the climate change. You can see there's a study, because climate change is influencing this trafficking of the women, trafficking of children, because those people are affected by climate change. They are facing problem in getting job, and they have been easily influenced by those people who are offering them good job or better future, and they are following those and being trafficked. So there is a research that shows that climate change is kind of increasing trafficking risks across countries. And we also, this is a case from, for instance, this is a case from one village in India, and they also see how the climate change are affecting poor people. Because of the climate change, there is a problem of economy, because so they have to migrate. And for instance, we can see here, there's many, because of the climate change, are driving many poor people to move away and to migrate, and many of them were trafficked in the process of migration. So these are just example of how the climate change is triggering social problem. And also there is a data, there is a research, and that shows that the climate change is even contributing to modern slavery, because poorest people are more vulnerable to climate variability, as they are dependent on forest and natural resources. There's a rise of internal and cross-border migration and destabilization of communities. So you can see that more than 140 million people could be displaced by the impact of climate change alone by 2050 if the action is not taken. So there's a clear, so the idea is the clear link between risky migration and various forms of exploitation, including trafficking, debt bondage, forced labor, has been established in prior work. So the idea here is, because of climate change, because we need to consider it as a social problem, because it is triggering social crisis, and there is a connection between climate change and the rise of social problems such as migration, exploitation, trafficking, death. So all these factors are connected to climate change. And second thing is, those factors are affecting those people who are already poor and vulnerable. And this also can also research by the energy science and social science, energy research and social science. They also show how the climate change is triggering modern slavery, because they have identified there's a natural disaster, there's a migration, there's a human trafficking, there's a job loss, and that will lead to slavery, because that will lead to deforestation, there's a biodiversity loss, fossil fuel consumption. So you see, there's a lot of research now, because it's not that we are, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of report by international organization that clearly provide evidence how climate change has become a social problem. It is beyond environmental problem, but the idea is it is connected to social well-being and the functioning of society. And the last thing probably about the social problem, because the whole idea, because this vicious circle continues. Now let's say, because there's a working paper by this Islam and Winkle, and they argue that this inequality caused by climate change affect the position of disadvantaged group of society, because they are exposed to climate hazard, they are susceptible to damage caused by climate hazard, and there's a decrease in the ability to cope with and recovery from the damage. So you see there's a vicious cycle continues, because the poor are affected, and the policy we are developing, including, let's say, about the climate policy, they are not addressing the need requirements of poor people in society, so they continue to suffer, and that goes into and that goes around. So they argue that there's a vicious cycle continues here. Both direct and indirect effect of climate change to because there's a lot of, and they argue that there's a direct and indirect effect of climate change to a disadvantaged group. Because, so when we talk about direct effect, we talk about disruption of, let's say, just one example, disruption of crops by climate change, induced flooding or drought. Or when we talk about indirect, it's a food and drought may trigger the rise of food price and insurance. So I mean, they are losing their crop, and at the same time they have to pay more money to buy the same food. So you see how the poor people are affected. So this vicious cycle or circle continues. So what are the challenges? So there are a number of challenges have been identified. So the first thing is an absence of well-designed and inclusive policies, mainly in developing countries. There's a failure to understand and address the social inclusion and all the socio-cultural political aspects of climate action, and how these actions, how the climate, for instance, how the climate change is affecting inequalities, forced labor, and migration. There's a challenge is to engaging with citizens, because we need to make citizens aware of climate change and get their support in developing policies and regulation. There's a lack of transparency about because we don't have this transparent information about climate change, and there's a lack of wider stakeholder engagement on climate risk management. There's also we need to engage with community in resilience, climate resilience building. So the most important thing is, of course, they talk about this many different things, and so where is climate accounting then? Or where is climate budgeting accountability? Here you can see they clearly mention there's a lack of transparency. Yeah, so because we don't have access of information of how we don't have access of information about climate change, and so there is here we can clearly see a lack of accounting and accountability, because there's a lack of transparency. Means accounting or accountability is meant to promote transparency. One objective of accounting or accountability is to promote transparency. So clearly it is mentioned in climate change, there is a lack of transparency. We don't have access to information, and there is a lack of wider engagement in climate risk management. So we can clearly see, because these reports or these studies have clearly, maybe not directly, they mention accounting or reporting or accountability, but indirectly they have clearly highlighted the importance of climate accounting, climate accountability and reporting, so as to mitigate this social problem. So what is going on? Of course, there's something going on. So it's nothing like if you go to International Public Sector Accounting Standard Board webpage, you will find they have started this consultation paper on advancing public sector sustainability reporting. So this standard is being developed in the process of development. And the IPSASP argued that it's very important to have this public sector specific sustainability reporting standard, because that will promote transparency and allow government to be held accountable for the long-term impact of their climate intervention. So it is clearly mentioned, because because in the IPSASP also clearly we see, okay, there's a lack of transparency in climate accounting information. We have lack of access to data. We don't have reliable data. So it's very important to have this sustainability reporting, and that is the way how we can hold government accountable for long-term impact of their climate intervention. So the standards is being developed, and they argue that standard will enable better informed decisions. So once the argument is that once you have that set of standard, it will help government to make a better decision about climate changes. And also, and of course, this, because we talk about this is a wider standard where we're connected to sustainability reporting, but the key aspect of this draft is climate change. Means what kind of accounting or reporting is required for to mitigate the challenges posed by climate change, and how the government can discharge their climate accountability. And if you go more deeper into that document, because they have identified three possible projects which can be developed in the coming years. So they say first they will focus on general requirement for disclosure of sustainability related financial information. So that is one part of the project. In the second part of the project, they say they will develop climate related disclosures for government. And in the third point is they will develop this natural resources accounting. It's a non-financial disclosure in parallel with the development of financial reporting guidance proposed in his consultation paper. So there, this project of sustainability reporting for public sector entities, it consists of three important elements. So one important element is the development of climate related disclosures. So they have also established the sustainability steering committee, and they are providing guidance in developing this standard. You can get more information from the web page of International Public Sector Accounting Standard Board. And if you look at the PAFA, you probably know PAFA, this public expenditure and financial accountability. This is a part of the World Bank, and they have also developed this climate responsible public financial management framework. So if you go to the website of PAFA, and you will find the document, and they have integrated the climate element within the wider public financial management framework. And they argue that the framework is very much driven by this Helsinki principle, and where there was a call for strong collaboration between different stakeholders in mitigating climate change, and the main argument was that climate change actions should proceed through fiscal policy, and the financial and this public financial management system should embed this climate framework. So this framework is probably they try to integrate national budgeting or budget planning, public investment management, procurement practices, intergovernmental fiscal relations in meetings. So all these are connected to this climate framework. So I recommend you to go to the web page of PAFA World Bank and see the climate framework, how they try to develop, how they try to integrate this climate element within the wider framework of public financial management. And in 2021, we also had the chance to work with this World Bank PAFA, and we did one study about integrating climate change and livelihood within public investment policies. The study was based on South Asia. We studied India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and the idea was to see how the climate code, or how the climate budgeting codes, or this reporting framework are integrated at the national level, and how they are and how they are also integrated, or how they are influencing these local level practices. And we found that climate change policies and strategies are well developed in many countries in Asia, but at the same time, because there are mechanisms, and because to allocate climate change budgeting. They have climate code, they have NDC, they have framework. So there's a lot of development taking place at the central level, but at the same time, there are, because when it comes to climate budgeting or investment at the local level, that is disintegrated from the central level. So it means that the climate change policies or climate change regulations enacted at the central level have very little effect at the local level. So the main finding was this climate change accounting, budgeting, reporting should be better aligned with local practices, and we also recommended the World Bank, because they should follow more bottom-up approach rather than top-down, because what is happening now is that the governments are developing different regulations, rules for climate change or climate accounting reporting, but that is not going to the local level. Let's say when the budget goes to the local level, that is the classification are mixed up. So we don't know how to what extent of local budget is contributing to climate change. At the central level, we can identify, okay, 40% of budget of the government of India, let's say, is aligned with their climate policies. But when that budget is allocated to the local level, then those kind of data are missing. And there's one more study where they asked, okay, for the climate change or to develop promote climate change accountability, there's a need to be more local engagement, and that is a study by I think they also study Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Nepal. So you can have this report where you can find how now they talk about the importance of public participation into climate budgeting, and they have evidence from Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Nepal. So research on climate accounting, reporting, and accountability. So you see that in depth because there's still very little work on public sector climate reporting, investment, accountability. So there are some works, but let's say by scholars like Baker or Nieberg or Liu, but there's not many papers talking about climate reporting, investment, accountability in developing countries. And for instance, between 1970 and 2006, only 9 of over 31,000 articles published in the top 30 business and management journals included global warming or climate change in the title. So it means you see that there's still this, of course, the research on climate change is increasing, but still not enough. And then few accounting scholars have highlighted the role of public budgeting in addressing climate-related challenges and the required financial resources, but limited work on the integration of climate change investment within the budgeting process at the subnational government level. So you see, there's really a lack of research on this climate change by accounting scholar. Sorry, this. So therefore, concerns are raised about the need for promoting cross-disciplinary research in public accounting in order to respond to grand challenges and wicked problems such as climate change. The most important thing, the researchers argue that when we talk about climate change, climate change has a social impact. So they argue that it's very important for us to promote more interdisciplinary research in climate change accounting, and that is also not well developed at the moment. But then, of course, there are discussions. They say, okay, when you talk about climate change and even circular economy, so what kind of accountability models may work? And recently, we worked in one project where we try to study how this global waste management, taking the context of UK and Sri Lanka, and the main argument is that because when you talk about it, same like I talked earlier, because there's still we find the dominant of market and legal forms of accountability. So when the climate change or circular economy business model, they are being operated, being influenced by market and legal forms of accountability. So when you talk about market accountability, we talk about organizations are more, they are more obliged to investors, customers, consumer, and they are more concerned about improving their profitability, etc. But they still how say, but they so the problem in this type of accountability was there's a collective norms and community values are not well addressed. We can see there's a power asymmetries, there's a structural biasness, social inequality. So they very often the companies or even like governments, the society is function following the logic of market accountability. There is also legal accountability because the companies are trying to comply with rules, regulations, and very often those like a powerful group, those people, those organizations who are in a position to lobby, they influence the rules, regulations. So very often rules and regulations are developed favoring those stakeholders, let's say shareholder or large company, multinational companies. So it means this social issues are very much marginalized. So when the companies follow market or legal accountability, then we see there is very often they have a limited focus and the social concerns are marginalized. And they argue that for climate accounting or for circular economy, what is important is then ethics of accountability. They argue that one approach of accountability that may work or that may be how I say more effective could be an ethics of accountability, because then again they back to the same issue, because there is a limitation with accounting based accountability, because we follow the same kind of account when we are following the present accounting system, let's say based on IFRS or IPSASB, then we are focusing on shareholders welfare, promoting profitability. So that is the problem, because so we need to so those kind of accounting have kind of limitation, because they don't consider other stakeholder, they don't emphasize other stakeholder on the same level. So central role of business lies in ensuring long-term viability of democratically governed society grounded in justice. So when you talk about ethic of accountability, we are talking about how say pursuing community-centered approaches and embedding wider social environmental concerns. So means the whole idea that we need to the idea of ethics of accountability that let's say organization they are established in a society, so they use many things from society, so they are obliged to give something back to society also. So they argue that okay, there is a reciprocal set of rights and responsibilities which may be not codified in regulations. So the companies or even government should realize that there is a reciprocal right and responsibility, because they are established in society, they are using social resources, they are using water, they are using air, they are using many other things, and that so they are also obliged to give something back to society. So they think of this, so there is an element of ethics there. So the companies should also think that element in discharging their accountability. And when it comes to climate change, they talk about more about social accountability. So when you talk about when we think of social accountability, it is more about empowering marginalized group that are traditionally excluded in climate policies. And they also argue that social accountability can be strengthened by developing a good link between local government communities and individuals. So the whole idea is that we need to embed this vulnerable groups in climate policy formulation and enforcement, and that is how the social accountability function, and that may be more effective in terms of this mitigating climate related problem. And then also argue, okay, then I took this from the work by this Barbara et al. And they talk about this, let's say how because like in climate change or even circular economy, we find that many scholars they're talking about this, including how say low, they're talking about more about plurality or localization or engaging people in the process of policy formulation. And these scholars like Barbara et al., they have discussed the concept of co-production. Of course, their paper is based on Italy, but they think, oh, okay, when you talk about engaging people or local in climate change policy making, they then the argument is that we need to think of like four important elements. That I think we need to make the process more inclusive. We need to make the process more representative. We need to think about representation, because there should be a wider representation, let's say female or gender or disability. So there should be more. When you think of representation, we need to think of interaction. That doesn't mean okay. We let's say the policymaker may try to engage with local individuals or communities, but that doesn't mean they will be interactive. So we need to ensure that the whole process will be interactive, and there would be responsiveness. So they have identified those four elements are very important when engaging with local communities. And they also argue that they also identify they say this and they talk about co-production, but that co-production includes four different aspects. One is co-planning, so means the public sector and stakeholders, citizens, civil society, organization, association, they should work collectively, that what services should be emphasized, what services should be provided, and how the services will meet the requirements of community. They should be involved in co-designing, so mean the decision-making process relating the operation and production of services, and the evaluation should be co-designed, because both the policymakers, citizens, and other stakeholders should work together in designing the process. And also they talk about co-delivery. The services are delivered through collaboration and efforts of citizens or members of the group. So in terms of delivery also, it's not, because they should be working together in delivering public services. And at the last stage, they argue that it's very important for users and other stakeholders to be involved in the process of monitoring and evaluation of services. Because very often when we talk about this engaging individuals or community in policy making, we talk about just how just developing the projects or program. We don't think about how, say, co-designing those programs and project together with the community member. We don't think about delivering services together collectively, and we don't think about evaluating the effectiveness of those services collectively, because now the focus is just on how, say, co-planning or co-allocation of resources. So it should be beyond. And they also argue that it's very important to ensure that those four elements are there. We need to think about inclusiveness, we need to think about representation, we need to think about interaction and responsiveness. So this is the whole idea, because the whole idea is because now so I come to the conclusion now. So the whole idea, because if you look at the existing debate, we see there's a lack of climate accounting, reporting, or accountability mechanism in the public sector, and even in the wider context, because how you say the argument is that it's very much we are following accounting based accountability, because the idea is that the accounting system that we are following at present may not be adequate to address the problems posed by climate change or the circular economy. So the idea is that we need to move beyond this house accounting based accountability, and we need to identify the mechanism, or we need to promote accountability based accounting to address these problems. Then the second thing is because when we talk about climate change, we are very much focused on at the macro level. Let's say we talk about this greenhouse gas emission, we talk about policies, we talk about budgeting code, we talk about different framework, but at the same time there are social and humanitarian consequences of climate change, and that should be taken into account. So because the whole idea is that when we talk about climate accountability, it's very important to consider the social and humanitarian consequences triggered by climate change, and climate accounting or reporting or accountability should be developed in a way that would enable, that will help address these problems or consequences. There are different models and approaches to climate change, but of course there are debates going on, and there are many different researchers. They have proposed different models and approaches to climate change accountability. For instance, some researchers they talk about an ethic of accountability. They think this is because we need to make aware. We need to create awareness, and that awareness will help understand organization and even government entities that they are based on society. They are using social resources, and they are obliged to give something back to society. So that element of ethics should be embedded in the policy or practices. There are some scholars, they talk about social accountability, and when they talk about social accountability, they argue that climate change policy practices should be developed in collaboration with wider stakeholder, including citizens and community members. And there are some other research that they argue, okay, climate change policies and practices can be developed in collaboration with individuals or society or member of society, but we should have a better mechanism. And they talk about for instance, co-production, and they argue that how the co-production embeds different elements, and what are the factors we need to take into account when we follow the approach of co-production. But the whole idea, the existing literature is yet to conceptualize and extend our understanding of climate accounting, reporting, and accountability in the public sector. So this is still the area where our knowledge is limited, because we try to define climate accounting, accountability from many different aspects, but still this conceptualization has not well established, and I think we are still learning. And at the end, there is calls are made for, but the whole idea here is calls are made from a shift from accounting based accountability towards accountability based accounting. So the idea is that we need to think of accounting differently if we are to resolve this problem more effectively and efficiently. And also we also have there's a call for paper, so I hope many of you will be able to submit the paper in this special issue. In this special issue, we are trying to collect papers on climate change accounting, reporting, and accountability responses by government, not-for-profit organizations, and charities. And if any of you would like to develop paper research on this topic, and any of you would like to submit paper in this special issue, please contact me. I'll try to help you as much as possible. And because we also in some cases we have also tried to connect you with some co-authors in different countries, so who can help you develop the paper. So there are different ways how we can help you. So please contact me if you are interested in developing paper for this special issue. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Pawan. Wow, there is a lot information. There is knowledge about research sociality accountability, ethic of accountability, climate accounting, reporting, public financial management, until make a shift from accounting-based accountability toward accountability-based accounting, and main information about public financial accounting. Now, please, it's time for Q&A section. Write your question in the chat box or raise your hand to ask your question directly to Professor Pawan. In this chat box, we have the question from Professor Indra Bastian, who asking about how to promote an accountability-based accounting in many utilities corporations, such as electricity, water, and etc. Can we utilize an accountability-based accounting in a school and hospital?
Yeah, thank you. That is a very, very interesting question, very important question, of course. And I think it's because when they talk about, let's say, when a scholar like Dillard or Vinari, when they talk about accountability-based accounting, they are talking about the plurality. It's a plurality means that when developing accountability or when delivering public services, we need to engage with the wider stakeholders, including the member of society. And so I think that that is probably and then they also talk about, okay, one thing is to include one thing is to make it more plural. The second thing is they also argue about this ethical element, because the organization should understand, because they have obligation to society. So it's just one thing is plurality, second thing is this understanding of ethical their ethical obligations. So I think that will probably help develop accountability-based accounting. That is what they argue. But there's still, of course, the problem here is they don't have kind of empirical evidence now how it actually works. Because that's why I mentioned in my slide, because we are still developing this topic. This topic is widely discussed, but still we don't have kind of evidence-based data, because the research is still is growing, but still there's a need to develop our understanding on this topic. So let's say we talk about accountability, and one example is maybe like this co-production, because engaging, like for the water or electricity, they can engage with the beneficiaries, or engage with the customers, engage with the policymakers, and try to develop some kind of framework to deliver better service. So I think that probably is what they are trying to say. It's most important thing: plurality, ethics, and engagement. Yeah.
Okay, there is another Prof in Rabastian. Do you want to make a question on ruler? Enough, Prof? Okay, thank you, Prof. Prof. Indra. And that's Professor Indra Bastian is from UGM, Universitas Gajah Mada Indonesia, Yogyakarta, Prof. Pawan. So it's nice to meet you. It's so we are so excited to get the knowledge from you. So, anyone want to ask the question? There is a lot knowledge from you. This is so fresh. The
Yeah, this
last
is very
research
technical.
in
Also, yeah, this is because the thing is because
yeah
when you talk about climate change accountability, then we need to the whole idea, the whole debate is that we need to consider climate change as a social problem, and then we need to start
yeah
developing the framework for accountability. We can't just based on existing accounting or existing understanding and develop framework for climate accountability. The idea is we need to go beyond. We need to see the consequences of climate change, and when we talk about consequences of climate change, we need to understand the
yeah
climate change is affecting poor and vulnerable
yes
more than anyone else. So we need to go to those people, those community, and then think of accountability and then start. So the starting from bottom up, coming to top level. Not because now the problem is we're coming from the top and going bottom using the same accounting
yeah
framework, and the idea is that may not be adequate to discharge climate accountability.
yeah yeah you agree, Prof. Yeah. We need the presentation. We need the participant to asking. Anyone do to get discussion with the Professor Pawan? Enough. This is a lot knowledge, right? Okay. Uh, I think thank you, Professor Pawan. Again, we get a new brand new inspiring knowledge and enjoyable in discussion. This is a honor to have you as our speaker for international lecturing that we held yesterday and today. To commemorate this event, we would like to give a present to present a token of appreciation uh, with giving a awarding certificate. Please, for the faculty giving the certificate.
Thank you very much. Okay.
That's for
Thank you so much for the
to
certificate.
see you in the we to have and discussion for the certificate. I'm Yusita Marini. We are close today for the lecturing. The
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Professor. I'm the MC on this event. Would like to say thank you for the committees and the event team. We are closing today. Good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Okay, Prof. Maybe we can collaborate research like that.